how many years in the business?
Just around 10 right now.
Yeah. So it's amazing how fast it goes by. But we have seen a lot of changes in our time, and really over the last couple of years. So we've got a slideshow that we'll be loosely referring to as well, and we're happy to take any questions after our presentation. But we can go ahead and get started with that. You know, industrial real estate has really just blossomed in a sense. I mean, it's become the preferred asset class along with multifamily. You know, most of my career, we were just sort of the, we were just the warehouse people, just doing our thing. Well, now all of a sudden, industrial real estate has really stepped up to meet the demands of what our population is trying to accomplish. And certainly a lot of things from industrial real estate came out of COVID. But even before that, things were in motion. Some buzzwords that we continue to hear, e-commerce, supply chain, safety stock, all of those terms are words that we hear and have heard all day, every day at conferences we've gone through over the years, but all of a sudden that's become national news, and it is a real thing. Industrial is becoming the new retail.
Yeah, you guys probably remember during COVID, there was a shortage of toilet paper, and that's a direct result of supply chain disruption, which really came to the forefront, in April and June of last year.
So in quick numbers, in 2020, about 20% of all retail sales were online, and I think to the average everyday person, what they may or may not understand what that means to our world, is that simply means that product that you are ordering off of the internet comes out of a warehouse. It is not necessarily or ever coming out of a retail store. So that is why the demand for industrial has become so important. And as you can see, kind of clearly, there's a long runway for e-commerce sales to happen. As comparison, in the Asian market, their retail sales are 50% online compared to our 20%. So as we look at sort of some of the industrial trends that were related to COVID,
there's obviously a pause, in March and April of last year. Businesses were talking about revenue in Q1 and Q2 being down 20 and 30%. And as you most remember, the whole world basically put on hold for that 60-day period. But as May 1st rolled around and stay-at-home orders were still in effect, there was a significant surge in online sales. And that's really the precedent coming out of COVID, that there was this compression to purchasing things online. And that's really been the story for the remainder of the 8 months of 2020. And we can talk about, some landlord concessions that occurred and transactions that were happening in March and April and May. Traditionally, there was free rent. We saw some free rent increase during that 90-day period. We saw annual escalations in lease on lease term transaction decrease. But again, kind of after that May 1st date, landlord concessions basically evaporated from the market.
Yeah, so we have seen, as Justin was mentioning, there was only a short blip, and it really wasn't necessarily a supply and demand issue. It was more of just how do we move forward in the in the world that we're living in now, and it caused a little bit of a backup in demand. So, in some of these issues on the supply versus demand, we say that the Charlotte market overview, but it's a U.S. Issue as a whole. Uh, the other big theme nationally and even locally is that bigger is better. The size of the buildings that are getting developed and talked about are getting bigger. Charlotte, for a really long time, was just a bread and butter regional market that served, a local.
Population, consumer driven market.
Yeah, exactly.
The deal sizes were reflective of that, where, people would ask, how big's your market, and what's the typical deal size? You would say, 75,000 to 150,000 square feet. And on the slide here where we're showing, bigger is better there in the top line, we've seen that deal size increase. What, Rob?
Well, we can kind of skip over to the speculative development. In 2015, 97 spec buildings were delivered. Of those, 18 were over 300,000 square feet. All of a sudden, in the Charlotte market, which we have never seen in our careers, there is a lack of supply that is, call it 300,000 square feet or more. And the developers that we're talking to, which is an unbelievable amount of folks trying to get in this market, we're telling them, if you can put up a 500,000 to even 1 million square foot spec building, it will lead to an e-commerce either probably in 7 months or less. And you may be asking, well, how or why is that? Well, Charlotte, for one, is serving a population base that's growing by 90 people a day. Also, our interstate and infrastructure has become, a regionally based important outlet with I-77, I-45, and I-85 as distribution chains. So, not only is Charlotte growing from a population base, but we're also an important piece of the supply chain, getting products to and from. Part of the other supply versus demand issues, as we talked about, those bigger buildings, we call those, or generally refer to those as cross docks. It's a building that has docks on both sides of the building, as opposed to the rear load product. There's a glut of rear load product on the market that will be absorbed, but again, these cross docks are what's extremely sexy right now. As far as like buildings to purchase, both from an investment standpoint and a user standpoint, there are almost none available. If you wanted to buy a building right now, it is a seller's market of 100%.
Yeah, and this is a product type that we speak to a lot of you guys about, and just to confirm the transactions. And right now, if you do a search in York County or Mecklenburg County, there's less than a handful of buildings available for purchase right now. And historically, over the last 12 months, there's been competition on each one of those transactions. And so the buildings are trading for close to purchase price. And, those same buildings were on the market in 2018. We're seeing a premium from anywhere from $10 to $20 a square foot increase in price in just 24 months.
Yeah, the quality of the building is not
indicative of the price per square foot.
Exactly. I mean, there are 40-foot buildings, $40 square foot buildings, in my opinion, 5 years ago, that were selling for over $100 a foot now, simply because of the supply constraint. So from a U.S. outlook, the absorption numbers are in our world fairly staggering. 274 million square feet absorbed. That's 18% higher than the year before. Asking rents, Charlotte specifically, for almost my entire career, saw this stagnant rent growth. Again, landlord's market from a supply and constraint, the rates are going up, and
And that rate increase really, what Rob's referencing, kind of that ceiling at 450, 475 a square foot for roughly 20 years. It broke the ceiling in 2018. And since then, you've seen these 8 to 10% annual increases in price per square foot asking rents.
So the vacancy rate right now fluctuates, and these numbers we're seeing right now at about 5.5%. May fluctuate even up to 9%, but that's simply based on the delivery of products.
New speculative product coming online.
Exactly. In the Charlotte market now, for all intents and purposes, is basically Rowan County all the way south to York County and west to Gaston and Lincoln County. There are spec projects and all of those submarkets, which we now consider Charlotte. You can see from that last blip that there were 339 million square feet under construction in the U.S., which is 3-4% higher than the year before that. Last time we were together, Justin and I think we were referring to it as the Amazon effect, and I think at that point, even just a couple of years ago, it was something that we were keeping our eyes on, but didn't really quite know how that might affect the industrial real estate world. Well, obviously, it is defining the industrial real estate world. As you can see from the top 10 occupiers, all of these occupiers are at this point servicing e-commerce platforms. Amazon is the top occupier in the U.S. with almost 88 million square feet. Those first 5 names are big names and brand names in the country. And Home Depot is the second behind Amazon at 6.1 million. Amazon occupies 14 times the square feet that Home Depot does. And Home Depot is one of the most active tenants in the market in the U.S. And as you can see from Charlotte occupiers as compared to national, it kind of tells the same story. Amazon, Walmart, Lowe's, Home Depot, FedEx, all those top names are in this market, not leasing 1 or 2 buildings, but looking to lease 3, 4, 5 buildings of big size, 500,000 square feet and up. We put this slide in to really show more that Charlotte is kind of maybe in the top 20 or so in the top growth markets, but I think what we're trying to get across here is that the Southeast in general, you can see that 3 of the top growth markets, 3 of the top 5 growth markets in the country are in the Southeast. 2 of those are port cities. So, the South is benefiting immensely from a lot of things, frankly, COVID, the business structure that goes on, that's offered here. So, the theme, a lot of the theme that we're going to hit on today is the long runway that both the South has in industrial real estate, how that's all coming together.
So just a quick Charlotte market overview. This is the slide that you can also see on CoStar if you guys subscribe to that. But again, the story here is that 2018, the asking rent in the warehouse probably had a 4 in front of it, and today it's north of $6 a square foot. Historically, the absorption square footage in our market is around 500,000 square feet a quarter. And that's been true for probably the last 3 years. But we continue to see that absorption square foot number increase significantly year over year. And, one thing to take a look at when we talk to people all across the country, they say, well, you've got 1.7 million square feet, 1.9 million square feet, over 3 million square feet under construction or new construction. And one thing to take into account is Rob mentioned Rowan County down to York County. The drive time is for a tractor trailer is over an hour and a half, to procure those two locations. So if you break that out into submarkets, it doesn't appear to be such a dominant square footage. Historically, the airport submarket and the southwest submarket of Charlotte have held the largest, under construction or speculative development.
Yeah, and from those numbers, you can kind of see where absorption meets the new and under construction. So I've heard someone mention that, though it doesn't happen as quickly as this, but there's a space for every tenant that needs it, which Charlotte has always been a really sound, fundamentally sound market, which remains so, which is also why we're getting a lot of attention from institutional grade capital and developers.
And one thing, you look at those numbers again, right now, our Colliers office is tracking around 7 million square feet of potential deals in the market. And those are considered deals where paper is currently being traded. And so, if half of those deals hit, that would equate to similar absorption during 2020. As you can see, absorption numbers and absorption by square foot, continue to increase. And we go back to that kind of 2017, 2018 landscape, and you can see that was the first years where we just saw strong absorption and rent growth starting in those years. And a lot of those transactions on the next slide, we can kind of break out to where they occurred. So you see the Iredale submarket, the Airport West submarket that we've talked about, and Rob can speak to the absorption there in Iredale County with a household name that occurred at the end of the year. That building closed in December?
Yeah, so Walmart's a 1 million square foot spec building, which, first and foremost, we generally thought that someone putting 1 million square feet of speculative space in Troutman was borderline insane. And lo and behold, a household name takes it. And it really goes to show, really, that deal, I think, besides all the Amazon deals, really solidified the story of what e-commerce is doing for markets. And this is, this isn't a Walmart 1 million square foot building that just served like the entire East Coast. I mean, this is like regional,
Right.
North and South Carolina type thing.
So that building was built speculative by Kathy Godley in our market, and it sold for $68 a square foot in December of last year. There's some other notable transactions. We've talked about the Airport West submarket. So that's 485 from 85 down to 77. So kind of, on a clock, you're picturing, 12 o'clock down to 6 o'clock on the western side of Charlotte. You had 3 or 4 notable transactions. A company that it's a supplier for Home Depot took 300,000 square feet in a building that was speculative being built. Amazon took 600,000 square feet, and another logistics company took over 100,000 square feet. And then there was the York County absorption. Rob can speak to, there was a significant amount of supply coming online in York County, and all of a sudden it was just evaporated in the last 6 months of last year.
Yeah, but again, the tenants that absorb that space were generally speaking e-commerce driven as well. Amazon, I don't know if we mentioned this earlier, but Amazon occupies about 4.5 million square feet in Charlotte, in the Charlotte market.
And I don't know if you guys saw the Business Journal last night. Colin announced that there's going to be another 150,000 square feet at the intersection of State 4, 115 and 485 on the north side of Charlotte.
Which is an interesting point because, at least now, we knew that deal was in the market, rumored. We think there's another deal similar to that in the market. I mean, these are sites that developers were fully planning on putting 2 and 3 spec buildings on where now Amazon is taking full sites for, whatever their uses are, their fulfillment or their delivery. So it's really fascinating to watch how what we call the Amazon effect years ago really take place. Some of the other things that we can talk about from a Charlotte standpoint, manufacturing is, it's stronger, but it's still having, I think, labor issues kind of drive where the manufacturers go. This is a very tight labor market in Charlotte and surrounding. Charlotte Mecklenburg proper is not real keen on giving incentives to industrial users as opposed to, say, South Carolina. So we tend to see more development on a distribution side of things than manufacturing. From a land basis, we've hit on this already, that the Charlotte market is really growing. The users still want to stay and hug the interstates. So if you're all off of 85, 77, 45, that's going to be a popular site. But we've expanded our searches for developers, again, to Rowan, York, Gadsden, and Lincoln counties for spec building, which I think, historically would have been build to suit hold sites.
Yesterday we were on the phone call with a national developer. They acquired an asset in Q4 of last year from Beacon Partners. It was a $200 million transaction. We'll mention it later. But they told us on the phone yesterday that they purchased over 1,500 acres of land in 2020. And that just shows there's a huge land grab going on right now. And from a perspective standpoint, developers were paying $50 to $75 a square foot for entitled land with utilities in the kind of 485 peripheral. And today, you're seeing those prices across the board jump to $150,000 per acre. If there are available sites in Mecklenburg County.
Yeah, and the shift is going towards 85 and servicing the whole corridor between now Charlotte, Greenville, Spartanburg, Atlanta, and north to Richmond and DC. So 85 is becoming more popular than it was. I think I-77 was the darling for a while, still is, but there's just limited sites along I-77 until you get kind of north of Statesville. Of interest to you guys, sales. Sales are tough right now. There really aren't any quality or even what I would consider deals from a marketing standpoint that really go out anymore. I mean, what we do day to day when we have institutional types or just any kind of investor who say we're interested in buying industrial real estate, we were literally just picking up the phone and calling owners to see if they would sell. And more likely or not, that their response to us is, we're not sellers, but if you find anything, let us know and we'll buy. So it is really difficult to even just manufacture a sale right now, and very rare that someone puts a package out that we can, we'll refer to the Beacon Partners deal. Right. That's something that's really hard to find right now. From a user standpoint, as we said, one example, it's a small example, but Justin and I have a 20,000 square foot building that's on I-85 that was built in the 60s. I mean, there's no frills to it whatsoever.
Right.
It's probably one of 3 buildings available, period. And the lack of supply is just unbelievable. Even though interest rates are low, it's an environment where users should be able to take advantage of it and investors, but it's just hard to find. And
And one quick other example to kind of combine that land and sales and owner occupier conversation that Rob mentioned. I'm working on a transaction in Mecklenburg County where we're going after 25 acres of land. On the land fits multiple buildings. In those buildings, most of the occupiers are tenants, but there is a primary, one of the buildings has a primary business. That business is very successful. So you're having a developer going after a piece of land that he intends to tear the buildings down. But part of the transaction is that one of the occupiers has to find a building to relocate into. So, and he's getting top dollar for his building, but he's looking at the available buildings, and as Rob just referenced, they're mediocre quality, and he's having to pay top dollar on that downstream acquisition. So you can just see how transactions are becoming more and more difficult, and the timeline to complete the transaction is continuing to be extended.
This is for another day, but if we are going to talk about something that we see maybe in the future is, when are we going to start seeing older industrial buildings being demolished for either new industrial buildings or other uses? It wasn't something I thought was coming anytime soon. And then I got an offer on a building that was built in the 50s in the Kimway Industrial Park last week that a developer wants to tear down so that they can do trailer parking for a Fortune 50 company. So that may be coming. From an industrial standpoint, the other kind of sector that we deal with is along the lines of what I was just referring to, specifically in South End or NODA, are some of the industrial buildings that are becoming obsolete from an industrial standpoint. Probably have already been rezoned if they're along the light rail and are becoming multifamily sites. The pricing and the fervor for multifamily along these former industrial areas is just as frothy as the industrial real estate development. It's amazing. So we had to kind of put on a different hat and learn how to be multifamily developers when we do business in the South End area. Developers are literally negotiating against themselves. I've got a client who owns some real estate in South End, about 3 acres, and one group has made 3 offers with no responses each time. Each time the number's gone up, $10 to $15 a square foot per land foot. So that is the other really fascinating aspect of Charlotte is these older industrial areas are becoming multifamily or office uses.
Yeah, we can. I mean, quickly, capital markets. We touched on this slightly, but as Rob mentioned, packages, as we call them, that are coming out to market by the investment sales teams at CRE or JLL. You've seen those markets shut down for what we consider March, April, May of last year. But again, that June 1st date, these markets opened back up, debt was available. We knew that the pricing was kind of holding water on the industrial front as well as multifamily front. And it was somebody turned the fire hose on. So Charlotte saw just some incredible investment sales last year, led by the Beacon transaction that we referenced. But I think, overall, you can see there's the Amazon effect, there's the absorption, and we're continuing to see cap rate compression.
We're as part of the theme, we're really lucky to be in the South and Southeast. We're really benefiting from what I say are just real life, and these aren't just things we're talking about trends. I mean, these are real life things that are running businesses from a development standpoint. We have an enormous population growth going on here, as well as particularly the entire South, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Texas. I mean, it's really unbelievable. From a kind of segueing from the capital markets, the cap rates, specifically in Charlotte, the cap rates here on certain asset classes like Class A industrial have reached kind of national levels. I think that for a really long time, Charlotte was more of a safe haven to try and find a deal, so to speak, where cap rates might be, even in the sixes for Class A type deals. But we're starting to hit for new construction and development. We've got credit on a lease standpoint, national type cap rates that I would say are like 5.5 and under.
Yeah, as folks have gotten price out of the larger markets for the last 5 years, they've started to look in Charlotte, and that is exponentially changed in the last 12 months.
Yeah,
really in the last 6 months. I mean, Charlotte's on everyone's radar from an investment sales standpoint.
Yeah, and Charlotte as a whole is doing most things right. From the airport to how we are, our infrastructure. We tell a really good story from a national standpoint, which leads into there were some sales last year, believe it or not, and some of those sales met high water marks, mainly speaking, Metrolina Industrial Park, which was developed by Beacon Partners. Beacon chased this land site for a really long time, literally 20 years, in a very land constrained submarket, which is basically Sunset Road off of exit 16.
It's the old Metrolina Fairgrounds site.
Exactly.
For you, those of you thinking about the location.
They built 1.9 million square feet, basically leased it all up. They took that to market. They had 40 offers.
They had two. So when a deal comes to market, you have to subscribe to the offering memorandum. And so they had over 200 people sign up for the offering memorandum. And as Rob referenced, they had over 40 offers. And typically, you say, okay, call for offers on a specific date, and then you whittle it down to probably 3 different variations to get to your best and final. But at 40 offers, it went through multiple iterations to get through.
Yeah.
And Clarion was awarded the deal. And so, for an example, $200 million sales price, Clarion putting somewhere between $150 million in debt down, and they're amortizing that debt over 25 years, and they've got an interest rate that's 2 3/4. So when you look at the cap rate of just above 4, you still you're getting a spread of a little over 2%, and that's what these guys are chasing, which is quite surprising in our market.
Yep, and one of the things we don't have on here necessarily, the Legacy Park East was a deal that was actually occupied by a company called Dirt. But what we don't have on there is empty buildings are being purchased also on a speculative basis. A developer selling to another developer, and there were a couple of buildings within Legacy Park East and in Rock Hill that sold to Silverman, who's a big name now in Charlotte. But that's another story. The Clarion Park, which was one of those, was half full. They bought it for $86 a square foot. So a couple of deals that happened, but airport, exactly. That Airport South building was bought vacant, but I think the story was Metrolina at a record per square foot sales price plus record cap rate, just about over 4. So, trends for the future from an industrial real estate perspective. Are we going to see things like electric vehicles that are more sustainable? Amazon may lead the way for something like that. Land is becoming increasingly more scarce. Again, we're kind of hitting more like we said that our market is growing. outside of the Charlotte MSA. So what we're calling Charlotte is vastly different than what we called it even 2 years ago. Charlotte is it's hard to get into from both a land perspective, from a building perspective. It's an incredibly hot market. The Amazon effect is full on, and it's from a competition standpoint, sites are getting gobbled up, buildings gobbled up, and they're competing with the big names of the world, Lowe's, Home Depot, stuff like that. So that they are driving what we're seeing as industrial real estate these days.
Yeah, and another factor of that is you guys have likely seen the building that Amazon just finished at the intersection of 485 and 85. When you're heading out of downtown Charlotte, it would be on your left or on the southwest corner. Anyway, Amazon, not specific to Charlotte, they 4 or 5 years ago started occupying, if the building was 1 million square feet, they would move into half the building prior to the building being finished. So you guys may have seen that in Charlotte, where they were loading out of the right side of the building when the roof wasn't even completed on the left side of the building. And so people like FedEx and Home Depot, that's a completely new phenomenon to them, where Amazon is continuing to set the trend. And we also talk about delivery times, and you guys all see it when you purchase something online. We talked about bigger is better. 3 years ago, this wasn't really in our quiver. But today, cross docks, which are buildings that load on both sides, the average lease up time is 7 months on those. And so that's a building that's 300 to 1 million square feet, where a developer is building that speculatively, which is just quite new to the Charlotte conversation. And then you see, maybe you guys are reading in some of the articles nationally that Home Depot, Target, some of even these retail folks like Kohl's and JCPenney, where they're closing some of their stores, but the stores are well located. So they're converting those boxes that were formerly big box retail uses. They're converting those buildings to last mile delivery station to keep up with their e-commerce online sales demand. And I know Rob mentioned it as well, is what's the next submarket, and kind of following along the I-85 corridor. We both believe East Charlotte, think Albemarle Road, from an available land standpoint, is probably the next pioneering opportunity for developers to start focusing on in Charlotte.
Yeah, I mean, we're basically the build it and they will come type thought process at this point. So
yeah, and a lot of this conversation has really been accelerated by the trends coming out of COVID. I mean, I think the biggest takeaway is that those 60 to 90 days when the whole world shut down and then it opened back up, the conversion of people purchasing product online, what happened in 5 months without COVID probably would have happened in 5 years. And that's how quickly the world changed.
Yeah, again, just to break it down from a very simplistic standpoint, anything you're going to order online comes out of the warehouse. So we're pretty excited to be in the industrial real estate world, because it's there are other sectors who are not having as much fun right now as we are, unfortunately. But we felt like we were that way for a really long time. So that's our presentation. So Vanessa, if anybody's got any questions, we'd be happy to try and answer them.
Yeah, no, thank you both so much. Also the graphs are just, I love how they spell everything out. We did have a question with regard to land, but I know that you guys already kind of spoke to that. People are just going further and further out. So, you said they're looking at Rowan and going up to Troutman and kind of looking at sites they wouldn't have considered a few years ago, is basically what I understand from that. So.
Yeah, basically the Mecklenburg County sites have all been picked over, and they've been picked over for specific reasons. They have topography issues, they have wetland issues, their zoning or Rock Hill for any other reason except for there's rock down there in the ground. So York County has some challenges on the available land sites that are off the I-77 corridor. So, you're just seeing developers venture out, but when they do that, they have challenges with utilities. And is the local municipality going to foot the bill to bring utilities to this site? That potentially a warehousing box, creates 300, maybe 500 jobs. Amazon at peak can create 1,000. So is the local municipality going to spend the dollars to bring utilities to a site that's only going to create 300 jobs? And a lot of times the answer to that is no. So these are just some of the challenges related to land that we're seeing across the region.
And as we continue to say the Amazon effect, well, the effect that Amazon's having on its competitors is they want to get away from the Amazon because of the labor standpoint. Amazon pays well. Some of these other companies may not pay as well, so they're going to try and be as far away from an Amazon distribution center as they can. So again, that's where we're seeing this spread in geography.
And so would you guys also maybe just speak to how does Raleigh compare to Charlotte? Are you seeing these similar trends there? And
yes, so Raleigh's been more of a life sciences occupier. You're obviously familiar, for 20 plus years now, you're familiar with the Research Triangle Park. And that occupies roughly in between Raleigh and Durham, which is Morrisville, which is right at the RDU airport. And so that's kind of the northwest quadrant of Raleigh. And again, over the last 4 or 5 years, Raleigh has transitioned more into a distribution market. So they're spreading out. So the 540 corridor, in Apex, kind of in the southwest corner, down to Gardner in the southeast, and Knightdale, which is due east of Raleigh, are all benefiting because of available land sites. And Amazon has just opened up a site in Knightdale / Gardner, which was at a former manufacturing factory. And related to pricing, historically the Raleigh-Durham market on a warehousing rate has always been about $1 per square foot higher. So our industrial rent's around $6, theirs are around $7. On the flex aspect, their rents are usually around $2 a square foot higher because there's a lot more infrastructure related to those life sciences that we've mentioned. But Raleigh is absorbing and seeing some of the same demands that Charlotte is seeing here. And to Rob's point, a lot of that's across the southeast, down into Florida and out to Texas.
Well, I think Raleigh's starting to see that same, like Dustin's saying. I mean, what considered not Raleigh is now Raleigh. And I think a lot of these bigger developers, they look at, like, say, Atlanta. Atlanta is 90 miles from the CBD of Atlanta. So they come to Charlotte and they're like, this is just right off 45. It looks great. Same in Raleigh. It's like, so I think we've tended to have a historic myopic view of what our submarkets and our markets are, and these larger developers are like, wow, I mean, this is right where we want to be. So Raleigh's seeing the same thing. Land prices are just cheaper outside of the CBD, and so that's where development starting to happen. We're happy to try to answer some of the questions.
Yeah. So we've got, have you started to see interest from the automotive industry for more space for storage of vehicles in industrial parks or warehouse space?
In Charlotte, not necessarily. I think that's probably more of maybe a port related type question. I don't think that we're going to see a lot of warehousing for auto, maybe parts and stuff like that, but not the actual cars and trucks themselves. I think those are going to be offloaded at ports and on their way that way, either via rail or truck.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Kelly? Okay. And then, and then we had another question. Is there any way that land can be found to build the smaller 10,000 to 30,000 square foot structure?
There is, and there are sites available, but a lot of the capital that gets deployed, they really need to have Justin, I mean, they need to have the mass to put the capital where it needs to be. And some of these smaller buildings are just not going to get the returns that these developers want. I mean, I could say that's probably going to be better suited for an end user, to purchase and do themselves. But from a spec basis, the land size will just be so small that they can't get a good rate for it.
But yes, I mean, to answer your question, there are available sites. Now they will have challenges. I mean, you may have to, if you're building 10 to 30,000 square feet, you typically think you can fit that on, an acre to an acre and a half, but that means you've got to have, an acre and a half of buildable land. And finding that today means you're looking at larger sites just to zero in on that buildable or usable acreage. And back to Kelly's point, Carvana is doing this, at the former Philip Morris site in Cabarrus County. They're in they took a portion of an existing building and then are building a smaller building, but they're these kind of intake centers where they bring in large amounts of cars. They basically clean them up, throw them on the internet, and then these cars, sit kind of out of view to the local consumer until someone purchases it online. And then Carvana, you probably see their truck. They throw it on the back of a roll back and deliver it to your front door. So I think they're leading the way in that conversation. And then there's some of the South Boulevard dealerships that have spilled out because they're just quite frankly out of land at their existing dealerships.
I think there's another question about I2. Scrolled up. Thing. Yeah, scarcity of I2 land in Macomb County. So that's a really good question.
Yeah, it's probably a two-part question there. I2 and then where developers migrate.
So from a distribution standpoint, the I2 versus I1 is not that big of a deal from a spec basis, because generally speaking, those users can go in I1, and that's going to be what most of the sites are. The I2 sites are generally, at this point, the older industrial areas that are seeing changes of use. So I would say that the developers are not as concerned about the I2, whereas the users of I2 are really concerned. I mean, they're getting priced out and moved out, basically. And to some of that, the benefit. I mean, we've got a client that owns 10 acres in NODA with an end user, and they'd love to sell, but they can't find a replacement anywhere in Charlotte, period. So that's a dilemma. I mean, we're like, please sell so we can have something to do. But we can't find them their replacement for their use. So that too is becoming very challenging. We'll get requests for, hey, we need 20,000 feet on 5 acres. And we're like, get in line.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Manufacturing, distribution construction, I would say, that's pretty heavily weighted for distribution. And there was a deal done in York County last year. It's a 200,000 square foot deal that was a rear load box that a manufacturing company went into. So the manufacturing groups are finding a way to take these rear load buildings, warehouse distribution buildings, and convert them to manufacturing sites. Now, specifically with that transaction, the reason why they took that building was because there was a power station, literally next door. So they needed, a extreme amount of amps. I can't remember the number, but that was really the only building in the market that met their power demands. And that was the Arrival deal that you all may have read about in the Charlotte Business Journal, which is an electric bus manufacturer that's going to York County.
Do we have any more questions? Anyone want to ask Justin, Rob a question, or I think we're good. And so I guess, and so, you know, I know that you mostly focused on warehouse, but flex in general too seems to be having the same scarcity, the same, you know, just trying to to even get them on the market, to, you know, to even
Yes, so I mean, a lot of the buildings that we referenced in these conversations, you know, they're greater than 200 feet deep, and the deal size that goes into a 240 to 320 foot deep building, the minimum deal size is, you know, roughly 34,000 square feet, given the way the column lines and the depths of the buildings line up. So that's what people are building. People are not building kind of the shallow bay flex product right now. And so what you're seeing is the second generation buildings. You're seeing a premium on the investment sales side. And you're also seeing a premium in the rental rate. That's, you know, if there's a 15,000 square foot space that's 50% office, you're seeing that rental rate go, you know, double digits, you know, $11.50 to $14 triple net. And then the operating expenses on top of that have increased to over $3 a square foot, you know, based on the tax revaluation that occurred in 2019. So a lot of tenants are raising their hand and saying, you know, guys, these OpEx, why are they so expensive? And, you know, Rob and I have to explain to them that the taxes are $1.50 to $2 a square foot, depending on the location. So, you know, to answer your question, you know, flex is really benefiting, you know, from these new construction Class A buildings, because those buildings can't accommodate tenants, you know, that are smaller than 30,000 square feet. And a lot of times these legacy flex products are in bulletproof locations. You know, they're located, you know, off South Boulevard, or really close to the airport, or off of, you know, exit 18 at W.T. Harris, where, you know, there's North Lake Mall and hotels and, you know, tons of amenities that these tenants can benefit from. So again, there's a bigger story there that, you know, is benefiting the flex market.
all right. Well, you guys, thank you both so much. It's good to see you, and you know, we appreciate it. And you know, I definitely needed to learn a little bit more about the industrial market, and that stuff was just all really timely and relevant. So really appreciate that, and your time today. So
Thank you so much for having us. And if anyone has any questions, they can feel free to reach out to us individually. We'd love to talk further. But thank you all so much for having us.
yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, well, we look forward to, you know, maybe doing this again next year then.
Great. Hopefully in person. Yeah.
Hopefully. All right. Thanks, everyone. We appreciate it. Make sure to check out the North Carolina Chapter Appraisal Institute page for upcoming education. We still have virtual. So we've got some good stuff coming up with Stephen Roach has a course coming up on the later in March. And we want to thank our annual sponsor, CompStack. They have sponsored our chapter for the year. And so, you know, we're appreciative of that. So again, everyone have a fantastic afternoon. It feels like Friday. It's not, but, you know, but we're almost there. So have a great rest of the week. And thanks again, guys.
Nice.
Appreciate it.